Greetings, writers. Today, we are taking our small moment story to the next step. We begin drafting. I want you to remember the writing process starts with coming up with ideas or brainstorming. Then, we start the drafting. It takes writers a couple times to draft a really strong story. Then we edit it for spelling and punctuation, and we revise it, maybe taking sentences out, replacing some words, and then publish it. So we're in the drafting stage, and it's okay at times to get stuck when you're drafting. Mr. Hoffman was hopeful that this organizer, the map that I gave you, will help those ideas flow. And when I looked at your work, Dalton and Zoe, yesterday, the ideas were flowing. We saw some great things. So I'm going to model with you the next step of drafting your small moment story using the story map. I'm going to do that with the narrative that I created when we introduced you to the concept of small moments of my Christmas day in 1996 when I hoped and wished for my Nintendo 64. So the way I created this organizer was to kind of give you the idea of the step-by-step of how you could create one of these small moment stories. So you're going to start with the first block, and that's that introduction. And this introduction, like we talked about, is going to give us an idea of where and when and what is going on. Paint that picture in my mind. So if you look here, I have Christmas Day, 1996, in my living room with green carpet. Our Christmas tree shone bright with red and white lights. I could see our front door. I use a lot of those sensory details, specifically that green carpet and those bright red and white lights, that hopefully you can imagine what it looked like when Mr. Hoffman was 10 years old in 1996 at 1138 Gerard Road, opening his Christmas presents. So I'm going to start with that first one, and the best way to start is to just start writing. So I'm going to type, it was Christmas Day, the year was 1996. And this is a story about me, so use the pronoun I. I was sitting in my living room. The carpet was fresh green, and our tree shone bright with red and white lights. So looking at my organizer to help me, you're not just taking things from your organizer and copying it down. You got to use this organizer to help you create the sentences, and both of you bulleted your organizer, so that way you can kind of have an idea, but you got to create a sentence for the bullets. So I covered Christmas Day, December 25th, 1996. In my living room, I could see our front door. So I'm going to say, my eyes wandered around the room and stared at my front door. Looking at the next part here, we're setting the stage. Tell me who was involved, what was happening. So I am at the part of my small moment where I'm saying my eyes were staring at the front door. If you remember from my story, at the end of my story, I opened my presents and I did not get my Nintendo 64. My grandfather walked in and he gave me my Nintendo 64 as a present that year. So this is kind of looking at now, we have to think of how this makes sense. My eyes wandered around the room and stared at my front door. So I'm going to say earlier, my brothers and sister opened our, I'm going to say, wonderful gifts. Describe, use adjectives, descriptive words of your nouns, your people, your place, or your things. And I'm saying wonderful gifts because I liked my gifts. If you remember what kind of gifts I got in here, it said I got toy soldiers, I received Star Wars figures, and other cool presents. I'm going to say I love my Star Wars action figures and toy soldiers. Now, talk about the emotion. Write how you felt and why. So I said I was excited about my presents because I worked hard all year to listen to my teachers and not fight with my siblings. Well, where would that have been? I don't know if that makes sense, putting that right after this. I was excited to open my gifts because I'd worked all year. Maybe that does actually make sense. I could have put that also up here. So you have to look at your paragraph and think of where do these bullets fit in and play around with it. It's something that you have to practice. I can't give you a formula or step-by-step way of doing it. I'm going to say that sentence probably fits best right here before I start talking about my presents. So I'm going to say I am excited to open my presents because I worked hard all year on fighting with my siblings and listening to my teacher. So again, let's just reread it. So while you're drafting, reread, get that flow. I notice with a lot of 4th and 5th graders I work with, that's the biggest challenge, is having flow. What I mean by that is, what am I reading? Does it make sense in the order that I'm writing it? Does it make sense in the order that I'm writing it? It was Christmas Day. The year was 1996. I was sitting in my living room. The carpet was fresh green and our tree shone bright with red and white lights. I'm excited to open my presents because I worked hard all year not fighting with my siblings and listening to my teacher. That made flow. That made sense. My eyes wandered around the room and stared at my front door. Earlier, my brothers and sisters opened our wonderful gifts. I loved my Star Wars action figures and toy soldiers. So when I read that, earlier, my brothers and sisters opened our wonderful gifts, I need to include me. Earlier, we opened our wonderful gifts, I'm going to say. You got to make sure you read to make sure it flows. I love my Star Wars action figures and toy soldiers. Remember, my problem in this was I became disappointed when I did not receive the one thing I wished the most. And that right there is a great small moment that we could, in the future, write a realistic fiction story. Have you ever become disappointed about something? So I became disappointed when I did not receive the one thing I wished for the most. My Nintendo 64. So I think of this story, right? And I think of, now I'm at my problem. I mean, it's not really a big problem because I still got wonderful gifts, it's important about just celebrating the holiday. But you are 10 years old, and you guys remember what it's like, when you really, really want something, right? So how did that problem get solved for a young Mr. Hoffman? Well, look at my organizer. My grandfather walked in with a present. It was my Nintendo 64. I smiled from ear to ear. So I like this part right here. Remember I talked about staring at the door at the beginning? I'm thinking maybe I'll put that in there. As I was about to stop staring at my door, who walks in? My grandfather walked in with a square box. I was excited to open the package. It was my Nintendo 64. Make sure you paint that picture right there, right? You can imagine me staring at the door. My grandfather walking in. I'm going to add a little bit more sensory detail to that. I don't want to get us too far off task, but I'm going to say my grandfather walked in, and I'm imagining how he looked. He had his brown coat on, and it was really cold that year. Well, he walked in and shaked off the cold. He was holding a square box. So again, you see how I'm rereading it a couple times to make sure it flows. I'm going to reread the whole thing again real quick. That's not how you spell shake. And my grandfather walked in and he shook is the right word. Oh, Mr. Hoffman made a mistake, and that was not intentional. So my small moment story. It was Christmas Day, the year was 1996. I was sitting in my living room. The carpet was fresh green and our tree shone bright with red and white lights. I'm excited to open my presents because I worked hard all year not fighting with my siblings and listening to my teacher, still flowing really, really well. My eyes wandered around the room and I stared at my front door. Earlier, we opened our wonderful gifts. I loved my Star Wars action figures and toy soldiers. I became disappointed when I did not receive the one thing I wished for most, my Nintendo 64. As I was about to stop staring at my door, my grandfather walked in and shook off the cold. He was holding a square box. I was excited to open the package. It was my Nintendo 64. Now let's end it. I looked around the room and saw the joy in my family. I understood that the holidays were to celebrate the people you love and care about. That night, I fell asleep with a controller in my hand. So don't just say, the end. Don't say what you did just next. Add some kind of intriguing line or ending hook. So I'm going to just copy and paste because I liked what that said. I looked around the room and saw the joy in my family. I understood that the holidays were to celebrate the people you love and care about. That night I fell asleep with a controller in my hand. So you really want to end that small moment with something that's interesting or intriguing. And I said my line that was interesting is I understood that the holidays were to celebrate the people you love and care about. So thinking of your narratives, talk about what that day meant for you. So I know Zoe got to meet Stitch, which was one of her most favorite characters of all time. And Dalton, you got to spend time with your Uno, your grandma Uno, who's no longer with us, unfortunately, but you had an amazing day with her that you still remember very, very vividly. So end that with that kind of that big picture line of why that was so important, or, why this is such a great small moment in your life. I hope this helps you. I will have my writer's notebook up for you to reference. What you're going to be doing today, you're going to be pulling these details and starting your draft. So I expect yours might not be as long as mine, but I do expect you to have, a paragraph done in the 45 minutes that you're working. If you have any questions, always feel free to ask. Mrs. Willinghand and I will be popping in and out to help you both. Thank you. Good luck, writers. I can't wait to read your work.